evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It is June 9th. My name is Nate Pike. I'm your host. We're back. It's been almost a month, if you could believe it, since our last live stream. But here we are. We're back. It's all good. And we got a lot to catch up on. I don't know, some of you may have caught it. We did a little show a little while ago. It was all about the Western Standard. I can't even tell you how much work that show took, which is one of the reasons why we had to take a little bit of a break, because the reality is that Alberta politics moves so quickly that had we not taken a break, we would have never been able to put the show together. So we did put the show together, and that's the last time that we'll ever have to talk about the Western Standard or its publisher, Derek Fildebrandt. No, it's not. It's not the last time that we have to talk about the Western Standard or its publisher, Derek Fildebrandt, because he had a bit of a week, about a week and a half ago, give or take, shortly after, maybe 2 weeks, shortly after April, May, middle of May, maybe, coinciding with the date of a thing we're going to talk about in just a sec. We got a little bit of a tip that there was something coming down the pipes for Mr. Fildebrandt, and we reached out to a few of our friends and said, hey, can you find anything? Do you know the things? And yeah, it turns out the story broke on Monday, June 3rd, when we and everybody else in the world got confirmation that what we were hearing was indeed a thing. On the evening of April 13th, 2024, Derek Fildebrandt was involved in a confrontation with 4 teenaged kids and has since been charged with some things. Now, here's the wild thing. I don't even have to say he was allegedly involved in a confrontation with 4 teenage kids. I can say he was involved in a confrontation with 4 teenage kids because even Derek admits, yeah, I totally was involved in a confrontation with 4 teenage kids. Now, the details of said confrontation are a little bit up for debate. We'll go to the CPS statement first, or the Calgary Police Service statement first. At approximately 8:50 p.m. on Saturday, April 13th, 2024, 4 teens aged 13 to 14 years old were allegedly threatened by a man while they were on their way to a convenience store. It is believed the boys were waiting on a friend when they were approached by the accused, whose residence they were standing in front of, as he believed that they were responsible for vandalizing his property. When confronted, the boys fled, and the man allegedly chased them in his vehicle and threatened them. A neighbor interjected, and the accused returned to his residence. As a result of this incident, Derek Fildebrandt is charged with 4 counts of uttering threats. So, to be clear, the Derek Fildebrandt of the Western Standard fame, of the shooting the deer fame, of the renting out his Airbnb while it was being paid for by taxpayers and pocketing the extra money fame, Derek allegedly chased down 4 kids in his vehicle and threatened them. Now, of course, there are always going to be differing responses, and Derek absolutely availed himself of the platform of his, which is the Western Standard. And he had a slightly different version of events that he published on Monday, June 3rd as well. A little bit more wandering. We'll do the highlights, if you will. On April 13th, I had been home for only a matter of minutes from a business trip in Ottawa when I found vandals, not alleged vandals, damaging my property. I confronted them and told them loudly to stay off my property. They called the police in order for them to give the vandals a talking to, as everybody who's ever dealt with police knows that police love it when people tell them what to do, and not have charges placed against them. Now, again, I'm going to interject here in Derek's statement. It's up on the screen, so you can read it if you want to. I'll finish reading it in a sec. It is not in Canada the victims of a crime that determine whether or not charges are placed. That is determined by the Crown. One would almost think Derek, having covered extensively the whole Premier of Alberta trying to mess with the justice system thing, he and everybody else who's involved in media would be familiar how justice system works now. I mean, certainly witnesses have to agree to testify and provide statements in order for the police to be able to bring forward enough evidence for charges to proceed. But you as the person don't get to decide whether or not charges are placed. Anyways, I called the police in order for them to give the vandals a talking to and not have charges placed against them. To avoid the consequences of vandalizing my property, these people concocted a story to the police that I had threatened them and outrageously even chased them with a shotgun. What they claimed was a shotgun, what was in fact my walking cane, which I've used since a motorcycle accident in September. Because these people could not tell the difference between a walking cane and a shotgun, they believed I've threatened them. Relatives of the vandals, again, not alleged, Derek says they're absolutely vandals, came to my house and threatened to assault me. Now, there's a lot to unpack in that statement there because of the lack of the allegedry that's going on there. But that was just the part of the statement that had to do with the incident, the confrontation. That's all that had to do with. Derek included a whole other sidebar, which is absolutely fascinating because he went on a whole tangent about how previously his bike had been vandalized. The last time I dealt with vandalism against my property, the Calgary police did nothing and led in large measure to my near fatal motorcycle crash. In September of last year, an addict pushed my motorcycle over for fun, causing thousands of dollars in damage and destroying the front handbrake lever. I located the criminal myself, called the police, and had to trail him for nearly 45 minutes through the downtown core before officers showed up. Days after that criminal broke my brake lever, I had a catastrophic motorcycle crash because I could not brake fast enough in emergency. As a result, I had a broken neck, a broken femur in 2 places, a broken hand, and a host of other smaller injuries. I'm still walking with a cane that these vandals incredibly told police was a shotgun. And because they believed it was, they felt threatened. So, a lot to unpack there. Because there's some things that go on in there. One of the other things that Derek includes in the hyperlink to the story that the Western Standard did about their chasing down the bike vandal is the fact that Derek used his bike to chase down the bike vandal. Now, I want to be very, very clear. As much as we have had a boatload of fun making fun of Derek and the Western Standard and the fact that they did indeed take government money for advertising, despite their promises up and down that they never ever took any government funding for anything. And they also had a sole source contract with the provincial government, despite the fact we don't want to see anyone get hurt. Nobody here wants to see anybody get hurt. Nobody here is celebrating the fact that Derek suffered injuries. But it might be worth unpacking who exactly is in the lion's share of responsibility for those injuries. Derek said that his front brake lever was completely destroyed in his statement. And yet he got on his bike to chase down the criminal who knocked it over and destroyed his front brake lever. So, at least once, Derek hopped on his bike when the front brake lever was broken. Now, if you take a look at what the inspection requirements are for a motorcycle, you have to have a functioning front brake. So you can say that, we'll give Derek the benefit of the doubt. Maybe when he hopped on his motorcycle to chase down the felon, the vandal, alleged vandal, he didn't realize that the front brake was as badly broken as it was. But one would assume that after tooling around the city, the downtown core, for 45 minutes, as Derek said he would have clued in on the fact that his front brake lever was broken. One would think that a advocate of personal responsibility and social responsibility, like Derek Fildebrandt, would have then said, this bike is not safe. I will not ride it. I will not put myself at risk. I will not put others at risk. I will not ride this bike. But apparently he did, and that's when he got into his terrible accident. So, for sure, the vandal's responsible for breaking the bike. The police who did nothing except for arrest the person who broke the bike, so I guess they did something, I don't think they're responsible for anything in this bike equation here, despite the way that Derek is trying to make it sound like the police are somehow at fault for his bike accident. One could almost think if we were going to, I don't know, assign blame for who was the most responsible for Derek getting into his accident, based on the description that he provided in both stories, it's him. I wonder if what we'll be talking about when we talk about Derek next. But one would think that if Derek had any sort of experience with the legal system, particularly in the realm of making threats, or I don't know, being the victim of threats, he would probably be aware of the fact that there's significant consequences. Oh, wait, that's exactly what happened with his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law threatened to kill him. His brother-in-law issued threats to him on a family outing, and his brother-in-law was charged and convicted with some consequences. So there's some actual life experience that Derek could have learned from. Figure that one out. Moving on from there. And God willing, that'll be the last time we talk about the Western Standard for a little bit. We got to talk about the 1905 committee. David Parker has allegedly left Alberta. He's gone. He's apparently gone to Ontario for a while. The rumors are plenty. Now, he does have his parents' rights tour coming up that he's organized with the American mathematician who's super credentialed for it. So he'll probably be back because they'll have a Denny's parking lot that they need to pose for pictures in. You make one joke one time, everybody takes it seriously. But it looks like with the absence, nature abhors a vacuum, and we have a new organization that is being heavily promoted by none other than Marco van Huigenbos to do the advocacy role of Take Back Alberta, the 1905 committee. Get it? Because it was in 1905 that Alberta's borders were drawn out of the Northwest Territories. It's important to realize that Alberta as a geographic space, while it didn't have the name Alberta, goes way back past 1905. It was part of the Northwest Territories. A little Canadian history for you there. And it appears to be run, this organization appears to be run by none other than a former disqualified UCP candidate, Nadine Wellwood. This is a screenshot we took today. That gets relevant in a sec. Nadine has made quite the name for herself. She was all about Danielle Smith in the run-up to the last election, but she was disqualified because, among other things, I got to make sure I read this properly, she's made quite a name for herself in the political realm by equating vaccine requirements during the peak of COVID to the Nazi regime. Suggesting that Putin's invasion of Ukraine is a battle against globalists, vaccine conspiracies of all kind. And while she was disqualified by the UCP, she did run for the People's Party of Canada in the federal election. Since her electoral bids, though, she has been billing herself as a motivational speaker and a life coach, who's now part of the 1905 committee. So that's cool. It's worth noting that in the days since its launch, originally when the 1905 committee launched, there was another name on that website. And that name was none other than Tim Hoven. But Tim actually issued a statement. He issued a clarification of sorts where he said regarding the 1905 committee, there was some miscommunication. And my name and photo were added to the website. I did not consent to have my bio or picture on the website, and I did not forward the photo or bio used on the website. I asked on Wednesday to be removed from the website and have been told that this will happen soon. It has happened as of this broadcast. I do not know enough about the goals and objectives of the 1905 committee, along with who is involved and who is backing it, to say that I support the organization. For those of you asking, I support Danielle Smith as premier. So bear with me for a sec because this gets good. Nadine Wellwood, who was the person who railed against the provincial government and the federal government and all the governments for taking liberties and forcing people to do things that they didn't necessarily want to do, even though there was a very good reason because there was a global pandemic. Her 1905 committee took Tim Hoven's information without his permission and claimed he was a part of the committee. Just really savor that one for a little bit because it's too good to be true. Moving on from, there's one other thing before we move on from there. If you take a look at the history of the 1905 committee, it while having launched on June 5th of 2024, it goes back, not quite to 1905, but it does in fact go back a good long ways. Up until June 5th, 2024, the Facebook page for the 1905 committee, which has 27,000 followers, probably because it's been around for 8 years, was the VoteWexit.com Facebook page. Prior to that, it was just Vote Wexit. Prior to that, it was the Prairie Freedom Movement. Prior to that, it was the Prairie Freedom Alliance. Prior to that, when it was first created on April 28th, 2017, it was the Prairie Freedom Alliance Party. So, I guess if you have 8 years to build up a Wexity Facebook page, it makes it a lot easier to look like you have some pretty big support. Now, we did a little bit of a teaser for this next segment. So we're going to talk about it for a sec. It's going to go on for more than a sec, but we're going to talk about it for a good long little bit. Because the biggest reason why we stumbled across the big part that makes this segment what it is, or what we're hoping it's going to be, is because of The Daily Show. Now, for any of you who are familiar, if you're not, you should be, because it's back on air, and they get Jon Stewart once a week, and that's just Christmas one day a week. But The Daily Show is a satirical comedy show out of the United States on the Comedy Network. It's been around for a very long time, and Jon Stewart was the host for a bunch of years. He came back, and now they do this thing where Jon Stewart hosts for one day, and then they have one of the other Daily Show correspondents do the hosting for the rest of the week. And it's awesome, and anybody who knows me knows that I'm a huge Jon Stewart fanboy. So, I promise, we're going to bring this all home. But before we get to the bring it at home part, we're going to go all the way down the rabbit hole. We're going to start with mining, coal mining on the eastern slopes. We're talking particularly about Grassy Mountain because the MD of Ranchlands has announced that they are appealing the AER's decision to allow coal exploration. Now, in order to understand the full scope of why this is a thing, there's a little bit of history that we have to walk through, okay? So anybody who's been paying attention to Alberta politics for the last 5-6 years probably knows there was that whole no coal mining on the eastern slopes. One of the areas that is targeted for coal mining exploration and was targeted for a coal mine is Grassy Mountain. Now, Grassy Mountain's coal development was being done by a company who at the time was called Benga Exploration or Benga Mining. There was a joint review that was done by the province and the federal government, and it pulled zero punches in regards to why it was rejected. Just to take a couple of points out of it, based on our assessment, we conclude that the project is likely to result in significant adverse environmental effects on surface water quality, West Slope cutthroat trout and their habitat, white bark pine, rough fescue grasslands, and vegetation species and community biodiversity. Although we identify other adverse residual effects, those are not likely to be significant. The next section, we also find that the project is likely to contribute to significant adverse cumulative environmental effects on West Slope cutthroat trout, little brown bats, grizzly bears, and white bark pine. Due to limitations of Benga's approach to assessing cumulative effects, we are unable to assess the magnitude of some cumulative effects. So this is from the decision that was done by the province and the federal government. And they both took a look, and both the province and the federal government said nope. So, exercising our authority as the AER, we deny Benga's applications, and then some numbers, under the Coal Conservation Act. As we are not approving the project under the Coal Conservation Act, there is no need to approve Benga's related applications under the Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act, the Water Act, the Public Lands Act, and therefore we also deny all of those applications. Now, there's one other part of this that's going to be pertinent in just a little bit. We find that the project would result in the loss of lands used for traditional activities, and this would affect Indigenous groups and their members who use the project area. We also find that the project is likely to result in significant adverse effects to physical and cultural heritage for 3 Treaty 7 First Nations. The mitigations measures proposed are not sufficient to fully mitigate these effects. However, all of the Treaty 7 First Nations in Métis Region 3 signed agreements with Benga and provided letters stating that they had no objection to the project. So let's be clear. In the refusal by the federal government and the province and the AER, massive environmental impact, significant impact to the significant adverse effects to physical and cultural heritage for 3 Treaty 7 First Nations. Now, this will be important later, I promise. But this is some of the grounds for which, the whole report is like 600 pages. This is the grounds for which the project was refused. Now, there was a new application that was brought forward. Now, this application was not for the mine itself, but it was for deep drilling for coal exploration. This all blew up in October of 2023. And the story that we have here on the screen is from City News. It's from October 5th, 2023. And this gets to be important for the timeline stuffs, because in that story, Brian Jean issued a statement to City TV where he said Grassy Mountain has had a project summary and environmental impact assessment filed with the AER for several years before the 2022 ministerial order, and thus it qualifies as an advanced coal project. So in early October, Brian Jean came out and said, it's totally an advanced project. It's all good. They get to go ahead because I said so. Except that's not quite the legal interpretation that a lot of people took. On the AB Law blog, lawyer Nigel Banks wrote a fairly long-ish opinion blog post, and the Coles notes of it was, and I'll read just a paragraph here. It is important to emphasize that the JRP, acting as the AER, is the final decision maker for applications under the CCA. Lots of letters here. The AER does not make a recommendation to a minister or to cabinet for a project governed by the CCA. It makes the final decision, and the decision of the AER was to, as I read earlier, deny Benga's applications under the Coal Conservation Act. At that point, therefore, the project that Benga had initiated with its 2015 application was dead. Benga attempted to revive the project by seeking permission to appeal the AER's decision to the Alberta Court of Appeal, but that court denied permission. Benga's further application to leave to appeal the Supreme Court of Canada was also denied. So Benga ran the whole gamut on what were the options to go and mine the coals, and all of the courts said, you're toast, you're finished, you're done, there's nowhere to go. And then on October 5th, 2023, Brian Jean said to City TV, the project qualified. Now that blog posting, AB log posting, came out, and there were a bunch of others. Big conversation around at the time because everybody's like, wait, Brian, it's not supposed to be alive. What are you doing here? And all of the lawyers said, wait, Brian, that's not how any of this works. And then Brian said, I'm going to write a letter. And so he wrote a letter to the AER. And in that letter, he said, the purpose of this letter is to provide my interpretation regarding appropriate application of the definition of the advanced coal project under that order. And what he's referring to is the ministerial order. So what he's saying, in effect, is this was a ministerial order. I'm the minister now. Here's my opinion. It is my understanding that 4 projects met and meet the definition of advanced coal project under clauses 3 and 6 of the Ministerial Order 002/2022, Mine 14, Vista Coal Mine Phase 2, Grassy Mountain, and Tent Mountain. Each of these 4 coal projects had submitted a project summary to the AAR for the purposes of determining whether an environmental impact assessment is required at the time the Ministerial Order was signed. The Ministerial Order does not require an active regulatory application tied to the project description to qualify as a project as an advanced coal project. Once a project is considered an advanced project, it remains as one, regardless of the outcome of regulatory applications submitted before it was declared an advanced project. So, to be clear, what Brian is saying there in relatively uncertain terms is, hey, it doesn't matter what the courts say. It doesn't matter what the lawyers say. The bottom line is that once something's an advanced project, it can never, ever, ever lose that status, apparently. And he seems, the subtext of the letter is, hey, it was a ministerial order. I'm the minister. You'll do what I tell you. Thank you. Now, the AAR subsequently accepted, after that letter, it subsequently accepted Northback's applications and promised public hearings on them. But Ranchlands, going back to the Ranchlands piece, Ranchlands in documents filed March 21st with the Alberta Court of Appeal argues Gene had no right to make that suggestion and the regulator was wrong to follow it. It says that the regulator, in effect, delegated its decision-making power to the ministry, contrary to the law, relying upon, adopting, or deferring to irrelevant or improper evidence in determining that the minister's letter carries significant weight or in giving any weight to the minister's letter at all was outside the minister's power. That's from the Ranchland submission. So, at this point, it should be pretty clear. Everybody thinks that Brian Jean's letter played a very significant role in Northback, who was Banga. They changed their name because they're sneaky. In Northback getting to go ahead with their mining applications. Anybody who's paying attention to it, except, I don't know, maybe somebody who was asked at a press conference this week.
Are opposed to mining in the Rockies, the large majority of Albertans. So why is your government supporting a new application by Northback Holdings?
I would say that it's an independent process. There were 4 advanced mining projects that the Alberta Energy Regulator has to consider. And the coal companies have to do the work of demonstrating that they can do development in a way that satisfies community concerns and addresses the environment. And that's an independent process. The Alberta Energy Regulator is going through that. And I'll just let them do their work. But I do think it's up to the coal companies to defend their products and projects and to bring the public on board.
There was a letter sent to the regulator. So you mentioned the word independence there a number of times. What do you say to Albertans that are now, I'm on social media, I'm reading a lot of people are worried about the regulator's independence because of that letter that was sent out?
If I understand it, there were 4 advanced projects. I think the minister just wanted to provide clarity about what those 4 were. I don't know that they had been identified. And these are ones that are brownfield sites. They had been developed in the past, perhaps in some cases not reclaimed particularly well. And so I think there was just some clarity about which ones might be able to have an opportunity to go through the regulatory process. So I'll just let that play out. And as I said, it's up to the coal companies, I think, to get the social license by satisfying community concerns and the environmental concerns.
So it's almost as if the decision, Danielle Smith's referencing the decision that Brian Jean made about the 4 companies being allowed to go, or the 4 projects being allowed to go ahead, and because he made the decision to tell the AER that it's independent, it all gets terribly confusing. But we still haven't gotten to the Daily Show part. We haven't. We're getting there, though. We're almost at the question: what does the Daily Show have to do with the Alberta zombie coal mine? And the answer has to do with the owner. Once you go high up enough through all the corporate little ladders, the owner of these 2 companies, an Australian coal magnate. She's very good at coal. She's made a lot of money at coal. Her dad made a lot of money at coal. Her name is Gina Rinehart. And we got to talk about Gina for a sec. Because thanks to a mining legacy that was started by her father, Gina is actually the richest person in Australia for like years and years and years. She has a net worth in excess of 37 billion with a B dollars. But she's also got a history of taking some fascinating positions on some issues. She has supported, and I'm going to try to do my best to pronounce this, Westralian succession, which I think is like Wexit, but for Australia. It's pretty much exactly what you think it is. She has previously denied that carbon change is influenced by human behavior. She has campaigned against carbon reduction. She's campaigned against woke initiatives in schools, largely due to one of the former schools that she attended, didn't graduate from because daddy had money, but one of the schools that she attended hired a trans educator. And so Gina made it a point of saying to as many people who she could possibly get to listen that to read from the Australian story, mothers in the USA are standing up in increasing numbers like the St. Hilda's parents are doing for their children at St. Hilda's. She warns against the woke propaganda. She's a big supporter of the Donald, the Trump. She even attended his 2024 campaign launch. This picture from The Guardian. They did a little red circle around her. She's right up at the front of the stage. That is Australian mining billionaire Gina Rinehart. Now, this is the launch that came. He already had some convictions that he had to deal with. But as much as Daddy gave her all the money, he also gave her a little bit of a problematic family legacy. In a 1984 interview for the film Couldn't Be Fairer, her father said on Indigenous peoples, the ones that are no good to themselves, I'm not going to do the accent, the ones that are no good to themselves and can't accept things, the half-castes. And this is where most of the trouble comes. I would dope the water up so they were sterile and would breed themselves out in the future, and that would solve the problem. Those that have been assimilated into, earning good living or earning wages amongst the civilized area, those that have been accepted into society, and they have accepted society and can handle society, I'd leave them well alone. That quote was done by Gina's dad, who, by all accounts, was sober, in 1984. But that's not the worst of it. This actually snowballed into a pretty significant issue. And we're going to go to a program from Australia called The Program. So I'm not speaking for Australians.
Dad said, while at the helm of Hancock prospecting, is hands down the worst thing anybody could say about another race.
I would dope the water up so that they were sterile and would breed themselves out.
Okay, let's be clear. Gina's old man was not a senile blow-in who got drunk and shot his mouth off. He was the mining pioneer who started the company. He was the one who handed the reins to Gina. He believed every one of those words.
The ones that are no good, I would dope the water up so that they were sterile and would breed themselves out.
Aussie basketball legend and Olympic flag bearer Andrew Gaze was on the money on Tuesday when he said this.
It's hard to get in a ring. I'm not blaming Gina Rinehart for her father's comments. What I don't understand is why she won't very publicly disassociate herself from
I love my dad, but.
And if my dad had said that, I'm going to educate him.
Yep.
Let's discuss it. Let's figure it out.
Us blackfellas are big on truth-telling. So, in the spirit of reconciliation, Gina, what do you think about your dad's comments? We just want to know what you reckon. Send us an email or come join us on the desk. Just let us know, Gina. As Australia's richest person, your words and opinions matter.
And that's really where it gets to be particularly important for the next little bit. Because you can absolutely say, hey, you know what? My Gina's dad he said some really bad things, but that was her dad. It's not like she's currently influencing the social fabric of Australia and other places around the world. It's not like she's using her money to generate influence in other places. So it's entirely reasonable for the folks, the Australian folks on the program, to say, hey, Gina, all we want to know is whether or not you stand by that statement or whether you're willing to disavow it. Your dad probably did some other really wonderful things. Maybe you could just, say that you don't support the promotion of genocide because it's really bad. Could you do that, Gina? And from everything that we can see, she did not. She has not, despite multiple attempts by multiple programs to say, hey, Gina, your dad has said these really horrible things on record. This was in a film. This was in an interview that he was prepared for. Could you maybe just disavow it and put everybody at peace of mind? She has not, in any place that we can find, disavowed those comments. But of course, there's always more. Her father also once said that nothing should be sacred from mining, whether it's your ground, my ground. And this is a quote, so don't come at me. The black fellow's ground or anybody else's. So the question of Aboriginal land rights and things of this nature shouldn't exist. That's another comment that Gina has not disavowed. Now, when you think about the ruling that talked about the fact that this project would cause significant harm to First Nations, treaty signatories in the area, not just environmental, but cultural as well, knowing perhaps that this family has held these views, or at the very least, some of them hold these views, some of them choose not to disavow them, starts to get to be really relevant really, really quickly. And it got relevant in Australia, too. Because in 2022, when Hancock, which is Gina's company, arranged a $15 million sponsorship deal of netball, which included athletes wearing the Hancock logo on their uniforms. Now, we looked up what netball is. It's basically basketball, but they changed it a little bit. So the Australians stole basketball. I think I'm just going to throw that out there. But an Indigenous player named Donald Wallam requested an exemption to wearing the uniform, not only because of Gina's dad's highly public comments on chemical genocide, but also because of the fact that Gina has never condemned or even disavowed her father's comments, despite being asked to for literally decades. She said, "I don't want to wear the jersey." Now, the story that we have up on the screen here, they did a little bit more digging into some of the sports deals that Hancock has done for sponsorship. Because one of the things that Hancock seems to like to do is throw gobs of money, irrefusable amounts of money at organizations and say, hey, you know what? You really want this money? Think of all the good that it can do. We just have a couple of little caveats. We'd like to put our logo on the uniforms. Or, because of this story from ABC, it's strongly implied that there was a lot more to the deal and others like it, citing an alleged removal of acknowledgement of country, going back again to Gina and her Westralia succession stuff in Swimming Australia. And actually, ABC wanted confirmation from Hancock that they had asked for removal of a social media post expressing support for Pride. One could imagine someone making an argument that Gina is used to throwing money around to get what she wants, not only in businesses, but for her personal political agenda. And as it turns out, after receiving letters that ABC speculated were written at the behest of Hancock by other Indigenous and Aboriginal groups, that rugby player, not the rugby player, the basketball, no, netball is what they call it. The netball player actually said, okay, you know what? If this money is going to do that much good for this sport and for all of my teammates and for everybody else who's trying to grow the sport, then all right, I'll wear the uniform. We're not going to cast any judgments on her for making that decision. But nonetheless, Gina And Hancock at that point said, well, maybe we need to make a little bit of a lesson out of you. Now, they didn't literally say that. That's not a quote. But they did kill the deal, which is unfortunate because that means that the Australian Netball League wasn't able to grow in the way that they had. And it means that this young woman who said, you know what, I'm going to try to stand on principle here. And when hearing from a bunch of other people in her community, said, okay, you know what, I'm going to take one for the team literally here so that we can get their money. The rug was pulled out from underneath them. So that's the kind of business dealing that it seems like Gina and Hancock do. You will take our money, you will take our deal, and you'll love it. And if you don't, if even one of you steps out of a line, then we're more than willing to pull the rug out from underneath you. That in mind, all of the money that Northback is dumping into the Crow's Nest Pass all of a sudden takes on an entirely different pallor. Because Northback has been funding lunch programs. They did buy and then expand a golf course in the Crow's Nest Pass area. And they have been having social functions out of that golf course that they're sponsoring and promoting. But what happens when these mines don't? What happens if the towns that are involved in these gifts don't show the appropriate appreciation? It is absolutely tragic that there are impoverished First Nations that are so desperate to try to find ways to support their people that they're willing to go into a deal with an organization like Northback that is owned by Hancock. And again, when we're talking about the respect for the land, when we're talking about the respect for the history and all of the significance of that land from both a cultural and a spiritual place for these First Nations, these Métis groups, all of these groups that are in there. I'll go back to the quote from her father: nothing should be sacred from mining, whether it's your ground, my ground, the black fellow's ground, or somebody else's. So the question of Aboriginal land rights and things of this nature shouldn't exist. That is another comment that Gina has not in any way disavowed. Which brings us, we're getting there, I promise, to the portrait. Because there was an Indigenous artist that did a portrait of Gina. Now, this portrait hanged. It was put up on a wall in a couple of museums before it made it to the National Art Gallery in Australia. On May 21st, on May 21st, 2024, it kind of blew up around the world that a portrait painted by an Indigenous artist, Vincent, and I'm sorry, Namajira, and her demands that the portrait, which was one of 21 on display, get removed. Now, this artist has a very particular sort of style, and here we're throwing up a bunch of the other portraits that were put on at this exhibition, and you can see it's a little bit on the abstract-y, and it's a little bit on the nose in some cases. We've got Queen Elizabeth in there, we've got Jimi Hendrix in there. There's a bunch of different figures in there, and then we've got Gina in the middle there. Gina said that she didn't want the portrait being hung, made a big deal out of it. And if you've ever heard of the Streisand effect, you probably know what happens next, because The Daily Show talked about the portrait too. And they mentioned her name. And that was enough to get one of the folks who helps out at the show here to go, wait a second, I know that name. And down the rabbit hole we went. But it's a particularly important rabbit hole, because it highlights the contempt that the owners of Northback have, not only for clearly Indigenous folks, but also for the people that they believe that they can use their massive amounts of money to leverage so they can get what they want. Hancock is all about the coal. And if you're in the way, then you will either be bought or brushed aside. But that's what led to the Daily Show doing a bit on the wounded ego of Australia's richest person. Moving on from there, we're going to talk about healthcare, and it's very bad right now. We have, as many people know, we keep our DMs open, and anybody who has anything that they want to try to get out there, but they can't do it themselves, we absolutely make our DMs available. Sometimes we get it. Most of the time, the DMs are actually quite accurate. Every once in a while, they're not inaccurate. We deleted one yesterday that falsely identified Danielle Smith as traveling to Florida yesterday. She was not traveling to Florida yesterday. So, we take ownership when they're demonstrably wrong, but a lot of the time, they're demonstrably right. And some of the DMs that we've been getting on healthcare over the last little while are absolutely chilling. And we want to take a sec to talk about some of them. One of the first ones that we got this week, I work in a large community hospital in the Edmonton zone. We have patients in hallways. We have 3 beds in a double room. We have 4 beds in triple room. We have patients in family lounge. We have a patient in a break room. And we have a massive workforce shortage. So yeah, unfunded beds are already the norm. They need to bring portables for the parking lot if they want us to find more space. Another one that we received. I've heard from multiple nursing colleagues that they are now using paper towel for pericare because the linen budgets are slashed. For anybody who's unfamiliar, pericare stands for, it's the short version of perineum, which is to say the cleaning of the poos and the peas. Keep that in mind as I read the next part. They're now using paper towel for pericare because the linen budgets are slashed, and residents are only budgeted for $8 a day of food. They are not bounty-style paper towels being rubbed on people's private areas. These are industrial-style, rough-as-hell paper towels. Albertans need to ask themselves if they would like their loved one to be subjected to that. The living conditions in prison are more humane. Another one that we got about SCNs, or Strategic Clinical Networks, was just in a meeting and was told that the UCP has scrapped the quality improvement groups within AHS. Everything is backlogged now because all of the levels of approval that are required. Strategic Clinical Networks and provincial programs are important resources for Alberta's health system. These groups work with stakeholders across the province to get evidence into practice and to provide better quality, better outcomes, and better value for the people of Alberta. These SCNs have now been scrapped. So to paraphrase what that DM is telling us, and it has since been confirmed by a bunch of other people, is that these clinical networks are designed to do the research of medicine. Medicine isn't a static thing. In medicine, things get learned as you go. The human body is an incredibly complex thing, and there's infinite ways for it to fail. And as you explore all of those ways that those things are failing, you learn more. And sometimes you learn something that's really, really important that can have a major difference in patient outcomes. It can have a major difference in quality of care, and it can absolutely have a major difference in cost savings. The SCNs are the mechanism by which all of that evidence is reviewed and the new best practices are put into place. In Alberta, the medicine practice has apparently now been frozen in time. We received a DM this afternoon that we didn't get a chance to get a graphic done for that talked about the fact that in all of the shuffle between AHS, there's no longer apparently, and hopefully somebody who's either in the chat or listening to this on the live stream or listening to this on the Twitter Spaces can confirm this, but apparently diabetic care has fallen through the cracks with the restructuring. That is horrifying. Anybody who has lived with or the disease of diabetes, or knows anybody who has the disease of diabetes, knows that diabetes, when poorly managed, can lead to absolutely catastrophic health outcomes in a lot of different ways. It can lead to infection. It can lead to blindness. It can lead to losing limbs. It can lead to increased heart attacks. It can lead to increased strokes. I could go on. And now that's just, well, hopefully somebody picks it up. The AMA released an infographic this week because one of the things that the UCP has talked about is they've said, hey, you know what? We keep getting all these cancer. We added a bunch of cancer. We added like 17, 18 cancer doctors. And that information is so misleading that the AMA took it upon themselves to release an infographic where they made it clear that, yes, there were 7.7 oncologists, because it's not all full-time, who were hired, who are new, of the 17.5 total full-time equivalents. But of the 17.5 total full-time equivalents, 9.5 are replacing for oncologists or cancer doctors who have left the practice. So we're really only up 7.7 cancer doctors in the province of Alberta. And to put it in sharp contrast, what the AMA estimates the number of oncologists needed to keep up with Alberta's current needs is 50 new ones. That's not counting for the attrition of oncologists who leave to go to another province or retire. We need 50 new ones. We got 7.7. We're down like 80% of the new cancer doctors that we need to keep up with the current need for cancer care in the province of Alberta. And then we get to this one, and this one, I know we're going to get some messages. We're going to get some DMs about this one. One of the things that the province of Alberta has started to pursue is the idea of, and Daniel Smith has said this many, many times, we gotta make sure that everybody's practicing to their maximum level of their scope of practice, which in theory isn't a bad idea. In practice, though, there have to be appropriate safeguards. There have to be appropriate boundaries that have been put in place. We got sent this from Bauer Place Shopping Center. We're thrilled to announce the opening of our new Pharmacist Care Clinic at Shoppers Drug Mart in Bauer Place on Monday, June 10th. The new clinic will offer a range of healthcare services to patients, including assessment and treatment of common illnesses and injuries. Now, the phrasing of this gets to be real dangerous because it starts to sound like a walk-in clinic that you might see a physician at. Through their expanded scope of practice, pharmacists in... There's a typo. Case in point. Through their extended scope of practice, pharmacists can assess patients and prescribe medications for minor illnesses and injuries, provide ongoing monitoring, education, and care plans for patients with chronic health conditions such as asthma, diabetes, COPD, heart disease, high blood pressure, and more. Now, that's some pretty generous language. There are elements of it that are true, but one of the things that's important to realize, especially when we start to talk about asthma, diabetes, COPD, heart disease, high blood pressure, is that there's significant diagnostics or tests that are required to figure out what's actually causing these things. And pharmacists can't do those tests. And in fact, most of the time, pharmacists can't order those tests. So to say, hey, if you've got asthma, diabetes, COPD, heart disease, high blood pressure, the pharmacist can take care of you is profoundly misleading, but not as misleading as the other one that we got shortly after we posted this one. There's a new pharmacist walk-in clinic that claims that they can provide and they can assess and write prescriptions for diarrhea, heartburn, reflux, never mind the many things that heartburn and reflux can present as that they're not actually the heartburn and the reflux, like heart attacks. Hemorrhoids, nausea. I just want to know who's the pharmacist who's doing these exams, is all I'm saying. And where are they doing these exams? Infections, bladder infections, shingles, strep throat, vaginal yeast infections, fungal infections of the skin, impetigo, cold sores, Lyme disease prevention, eye infections, allergy symptoms, oral thrush, oral ulcers, sore throat, birth control, menstrual cramps, emergency contraception, vaginal yeast infections, acne, calluses and corns, contact allergy, dermatitis, dandruff, eczema, fungal infections of the skin, hives, impetigo, and warts. Now, a lot of those are minor, and a lot of those can be treated using drugs that pharmacists can prescribe. But a lot of those things can also be presentations that are symptomatic of other things. And if you're just treating the outward appearance, you're missing the actual underneath. This is, again, one of the reasons why physicians order tests like blood work, to make sure that they know everything that's going on in the background, not just the stuff that's presenting on the surface. The scariest one for me in here is the heartburn and the reflux. Because as anybody who's spent any time in healthcare knows, or if you've even watched a heart and stroke commercial ever, heartburn and reflux can be one of the biggest symptoms of a cardiac episode, of a heart attack. I don't think that there are going to be a whole lot of pharmacies that are going to be equipped with the ECGs that are required to determine whether or not that's happening. And I would be very, very surprised if these pharmacies have the ability to do the appropriate blood work tests to determine whether or not there has actually been any sort of injury to heart muscle. Pharmacists, when working as part of a collaborative team, can play a tremendous role in healthcare. But the reason why we're spending so much time of this episode talking about how dangerous this is because we also have heard this week from people who are getting drugs prescribed that are, quite frankly, dangerous. We received a message from somebody who was talking about the fact that they received a prescription for a class of drug called a benzodiazepine, which can sometimes be used for anxiety, but it's not the first and only treatment for anxiety because it is profoundly and highly addictive. If you don't believe me, next time you see your family doctor or a walk-in clinic, ask them how willingly they provide prescriptions for benzodiazepines, because it's a pretty high threshold. And it's certainly not the first line drug, because the kicker to this story is the person who received this prescription went in for a COVID shot. And the pharmacist said, well, let's just do a quick little health checkup. And they said, well, I've been feeling a little bit anxious about some things. And the pharmacist involved allegedly said, okay, well, here's these highly addictive benzodiazepines. Good luck. That should be really scary. And it should be something that makes sure that if we're going to roll out expanded scope of practices, which we should under the right circumstances with the appropriate safeguards in place, we need to make sure it's under the right circumstances and with the appropriate safeguards in place. Moving on from there, we're going to do a strange thing and talk about an Ontario politician. We're going to talk about the NDP MP, Charlie Angus. And this does get relevant to Alberta, I promise. Charlie Angus has been leading a little bit of a crusade. Now, it's important to be clear. He's already said he's not running again. He's done. He's out. So none of the things that he's doing are performative or so that he can get some sort of political capital to take one last kick at the can. He said that he's not going to run again. So he's doing things that he believes in. He's trying to get things that he really, really wants to see brought past the goalpost. And one of the things that he's doing is he's trying to get legislation in place that says oil and gas companies shouldn't lie about the environmental impact of their product, which isn't unreasonable. They shouldn't. Nobody should. And the metaphor, the example that MP Angus has used is to say, hey, you know what? We do it for tobacco. If people want to choose to use tobacco, then they can fill their boots and they can use tobacco. But if somebody doesn't know that tobacco causes all of the very bad things that tobacco can cause, then the companies shouldn't be able to lie about smoking curing cancer or smoking curing asthma, because it just makes those things worse. Oil and gas companies shouldn't be able to lie about the environmental impact or the impact of things that they're doing to try to mitigate the environmental impact of their products, which prompted you can't even Alberta politics. I love it. Alberta Minister of Environment and Protected Areas to release a statement. I'll take one of the lines out of it that said, companies that wish to defend their environmental record will now have to prove their claims can be substantiated by an international recognized methodology. And C-59, put plain and simple, is an undemocratic gag order. It must be stopped. That's not the Minister of Energy. That's not the Minister of Oil and Gas. That's the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas arguing, in effect, that oil companies should be allowed to lie to you. There shouldn't be any standards that they should be held to in regards to their claims. Now, I want to be real clear. I am not somebody who is blind to how dependent the Alberta economy currently is on oil and gas. I don't have a problem with Alberta continuing to produce oil and gas and energy in an increasingly responsible way, fingers crossed. But I also don't believe that we should just be like, oil and gas is sacrosanct. You can never say anything bad about them, and you certainly should never hold them accountable. Of course we should. They should be held to the same standards as anybody else who's trying to sell something. They shouldn't be able to lie. But the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas doesn't want to see the oil companies treated unfairly. Now, this prompted Danielle Smith to be asked about it on Wednesday, and she had some thoughts.
Kind of push back on your concerns about that, saying you should want the oil and gas industry to tell the truth. So that bill is before the Senate right now. I'm wondering what steps are you taking in response to that bill? Are you talking to senators? Are you considering legal action?
Well, maybe I'll be the first person prosecuted under the Act, because I can tell you that our oil and gas industry has got a better environmental record than anywhere in the world, and I'm going to continue to celebrate that. They aspirationally want to reach net zero by 2050, and I'm going to support them every step in the way, whether it's through carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or the adoption of small modular nuclear, or working on direct air capture. And so I will not stop promoting our industry. In fact, I want to double the production in the oil and natural gas sector. And so if I have to be the only one out there who, we got some helicopters landing in the background, so I hope you can still hear me. But if I've got to be the only one out there that is going to defend the industry, then I'm happy to do that. But I think it's outrageous that federal politicians would stand in the way of the incredible amount of work that our industry is doing in advancing emissions reduction, as well as continuing to provide the world the energy that they need and eliminate global energy poverty. But there's another constitutional challenge in the works here. I mean, free speech is a guaranteed charter right, and energy companies, as well as provincial politicians, have the right to be able to talk about their products and to be able to sell it to the world. So I think they've gone way, way over their skis on this one, and I regret that they've gone in this direction. But ultimately, if it lands in court, that's where we're going to have to settle this out. We have a multitude of court actions against the federal government for stepping out of its constitutional jurisdiction. This is just one more example, and we'll fight them. We've won a couple, and I think we'll win more.
Now, there's so much to unpack in that clip because, first of all, let's remember, the bill is designed to prevent oil companies from lying. It's not saying they can't advertise. That's not what it's saying. It's saying they can't lie. And the Premier of Alberta just did roughly 2 minutes on, you know what, if they try to say that we can't lie about how good oil companies are, I'll be the first person to stand up and lie about how good oil companies are, which is a fascinating position to take for a whole list of reasons. But then she goes on to say that corporations enjoy charter rights. Except, of course, they don't. There are some rights that corporations have that overlap with charter rights, but a corporation does not have a right to freedom of expression. That's simply not a thing in Canada. Now, if you were to go south of the border, where in many circumstances corporations are considered to be legally equal to people, sure. But again, maybe Danny needs to remember what country she's an elected official in. It's absolutely mind-blowing. At a certain point, one would think if there was anybody with two little sparks of competence to rub together in this current government, somebody would take Danielle Smith aside and give her a basic lesson in civics. Because it's unbelievable. And yet here we are. That the person who literally got into all kinds of trouble because she didn't understand that it was bad for a premier to try to interfere in the administration of justice hasn't been brought up to speed on here's what the rules are. Here's how the law works in Canada. She talks about the Charter all the time. She talks about how much love and respect she has for the Charter and how she's the most freedom-loving politician that ever there was. But she doesn't seem to have even the most basic understandings. And this is something that Albertans should be livid over. Because not only is she comfortable standing in front of a microphone and just making shit up as she goes, but she also seems to have no consideration whatsoever for the fact that there are people who listen to her and shockingly still believe her. She's not leading the conversation anywhere but in a downward spiral. And it's embarrassing. And it's unfortunate that at press conferences, reporters are only allowed to ask at maximum 2 questions. And there's very little window for any reporter to say, Danny, I just want to be clear here. You just said the Constitution affords companies charter rights, and companies aren't allowed to say that they have freedom of expression in Canada. I think you're thinking of the United States. There's no window for them to ask that question. And unfortunately, because Danny and the UCP are so good at flooding the field, by the time somebody does get the opportunity to follow up with her, she's moved on to the next incredibly dumb thing to say. Moving on from there. For those of you who are on the Twitter Spaces, we have a very clever graphic up right now for our next segment because it was a good week to be a former staffer or a former Conservative elected official. Former UCP staffers Ryan Hasteman and Brittany Baltimore both got plum appointments by the UCP. Ryan Hasteman was appointed to the board of directors for the University of Alberta for a term to expire on June 5th, 2027, with a few other folks. And we've put a little bit of Ryan's public resume on the screen as well. Ryan started with the government in 2019 with Rajan Sani and was her chief of staff as AISH was de-indexed and payment dates were adjusted to pad the budget books. He moved on from there to be the deputy executive director of UCP Caucus before again becoming Rajan's chief of staff until she stepped away from a ministerial role to run for UCP leadership. He then transitioned to a role as the director of policy coordination office for the premier, Danielle Smith. He was just appointed to the U of A board of directors. Brittany Baltimore started as a press secretary for Jason Copping when she was also moved into a role in caucus she was actually Hasteman's boss, if we're reading the timelines correctly, as executive director of caucus from December of 2020 to November of 2021. She then had a brief stint as the vice president of a lobbying group, Wellington Advocacy, which is basically the island of misfit toys for political staffers. We're not done. Former MP and diplomat Rob Merrifield was appointed to the Council for the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta, which is intriguing, given that in 2004, He got the federal Tories in all kinds of hot water because he was advocating for a shift in abortion regulations by calling for third-party counseling for women who are considering terminating their pregnancies. Basically, what he said was, if a woman wants to get an abortion, she should have to get counseling first. So that's not at all chilling, given that he has been appointed to the Council of the College of Physicians and Surgeons until 2027. But that wasn't the big appointment that got everybody's attention, now was it? Because none other than former Alberta Premier Alison Redford was appointed to the Invest Alberta Corporation as a member of the board of directors for a term that will expire on January 30th, 2027. Now, Alison Redford has a fairly long resume, so we didn't include the whole resume. We did include, though, on the screen here, the report from the Auditor General of Alberta, where he talked about some of the problems that Alison Redford had in her office. Overall, the expense practices and use of public assets by Premier Redford and her office have fallen short of publicly stated goals. How could this have happened? The answer is the aura of power around Premier Redford and her office and the perception that the influence of office should not be questioned. We observed a tendency to work around or ignore rules in order to fill requests coming from the Premier's office in ways that avoided leading the Premier and personal responsibility for decisions. Other areas of government were wary of challenging decisions made in the Premier's office. All of the failings might have been prevented or detected earlier with oversight designed to provide substantive challenge. Now, this has prompted a lot of questions. Some people have said, hey, that was a scathing Auditor General report. There's some history here. Danny, what you doing here? What you giving Alison Redford the job for? Danielle Smith issued a statement. With her dedicated service to this province, extensive background in law, and proven successes in strategic advisory roles, Ms. Redford's perspectives and expertise will be a valued addition to the board and to the agency's ongoing work to attract job-creating investments from around the world, which is honestly a little wild because it wasn't that long ago, nay, but 2 years, that this is what Smith had to say.
To be the leader of the official opposition. And I took that role very seriously. I was a very strong opposition leader when Ed Stelmach was premier, pointing out the things in the direction I think he was going wrong, particularly on the new royalty framework. And in the end, it turned out that we were quite correct, because when Alison Redford got in, she very quickly changed the new royalty framework. So we had some successes there. But then, of course, Alison Redford had all kinds of issues of questionable decision-making around the use of taxpayer dollars. And we had to raise those issues. And then ultimately, she was replaced by her caucus as well. So when Jim came back, I think you expected me to do the same thing, that I was supposed to hold him to account as official opposition leader, and that I was supposed to make him prove to us that he was going to be different, because ultimately he wasn't able to prove to us that he was different. The coalition blew apart, and it took Brian, Gina, and Jason Kenney to try to heal the movement and bring it back together again.
So there's a compelling argument, not only for the effectiveness and judgment of Alison Redford, but also, by extension, Danielle Smith. But a lot of people have been saying, Invest Alberta, what is this Invest Alberta thing? This is new to me. Are we investing Albertans' money? Is this a pension plan thing? So we figured we'd do 5-10 minutes tonight and do a little bit of public service and talk a little bit about what is Invest Alberta. So the easiest way to think about Invest Alberta is everybody knows about the War Room, the Canadian Energy Centre. They're like that, but VoIPable and required to do public disclosures. And their mandate is to try to attract investment for the entire province. So while the Canadian Energy Centre or the Energy War Room's job is to go to war with all of the Bigfoot, the Invest Alberta is supposed to say, hey, Alberta is the greatest place to invest your money. You should come and do that. Here's how. But there's been some hiccups. It was originally started. It's actually a fairly new agency. It was originally put together in 2020 under Tanya Furr, and as history shows, Tanya Furr, she was kind of big on the travel. That's going to be a theme real quick here as we work our way through the Invest Alberta legacy or story so far. We took a look at the Invest Alberta disclosures to see what is the money they're spending. How are they spending this money? They have a budget of at least $3 million a year. What are they spending all this money on? And I want to be clear. There's a lot of people who have said, you know what, Invest Alberta has brought investments into Alberta. That's not a bad thing. We just have some questions. The first CEO, David Knight-Legg, claimed just under $4,000 in expenses for his time as CEO, which appears to have only been 2 months. So Invest Alberta was started up. David Knight-Legg was the first CEO. He was there for about 2 months, and he racked up about $4,000 of expenses for Invest Alberta. Things like travel, hotel rooms, all of that kind of stuff. The following interim CEO, Greg Baker, filed 2 claims for a 6-month period ending in December of 2021. And those for that period was just about $3,500. So not a whole lot. And then the new CEO, Rick Christiansen. I apologize, Rick. I'm saying your last name wrong. I know it. You know it. My bad. We'll just go with Rick from here on in. In 2022, he racked up an impressive $152,442.25 in expenses. In 2023, he raised the bar, $181,624.35. So far this year, just the first quarter, because that's all that's been disclosed so far, so you can probably theoretically multiply this number by 4 to figure out how much he's going to spend for the rest of the year. $66,269, which by our math puts Rick in the range, if he stays on that rate of spending, as spending about $230,000 on expenses. Now, all of these expenses are things like airfare or hotel rooms or Ubers or fancy hotel rooms or Ubers or fancier hotel rooms. But a stunning amount of this is actually travel between Alberta and BC. And that could be because it appears that Rick, who's the CEO of Invest Alberta, it seems like he lives in BC. Because when you line up his expenses with the reasons for why he's expensing them, every time he's coming from Vancouver to Edmonton, it's for a meeting in Edmonton. So that's suggestive of the fact that he lives in Vancouver, which is not a shock because he's been a Vancouver CEO and business person for like 20 years. So there's that. But it's a little weird. It's a little dissonant because if the organization that hired a CEO to sell Alberta to the world can't even convince that same CEO to, live in Alberta, it's a little dissonant. But that's not the only place that Invest Alberta seems to have some challenges, opportunities. There's a website called Glassdoor. And Glassdoor is a website that's designed to increase transparency in the business world. Their basic goal is to make things for their members as transparent as possible. So if you know a great company, you worked at a great company, you're working at a great company, you can throw up a recommendation. You say, hey, you know what, everybody? I work for, the Breakdown Media, and they're the best company in the history of companies. You should all want to work for them. And then there's the flip side. So if you want to warn people, if you want to say, hey, I worked for the Bluster Mandard. I'm just pulling that name out of the ether. It's not reflective of a real company in any way. And don't work for them. If that's what you wanted to do and warn people about the Bluster and Mandard, you could do that. So we thought we'd take a look on Glassdoor and see what some of the reviews of Invest Alberta are like. And they're, let's go with telling. So, starting with we're going to start with the mild ones. The headline is Worst Place Ever. All caps for the ever. Pros, nothing. Joining IAC was an absolute mistake and set my career back significantly. This is from, by the way, a former director. Cons, management has no interest in any form of dissenting views or opinions. Their way or the highway. Anyone that expresses a divergent opinion gets fired. Contracts are structured to limit severance. All around a horrible place to work. The entire leadership team needs to go. Doubtful the company will last through any change in premier/government. Another review titled Sinking Ship. Pros, I receive income to pay my bills. And this is from a current employee. They're writing it anonymously, but it's a current employee who's writing this. Cons, there's toxic leadership and so much nepotism. There's an inability to keep good people. Firing and threatening to fire are common. Every day it is an unhealthy atmosphere. Unrealistic expectations and ruling by fear are also common. IAC keeps telling everyone how great it is, but the reality is the opposite for us living it. Those were the mild ones. Another one titled Toxic. Pros, health benefits are decent. People working in the support teams were nice and helped each other out despite the difficult attitudes and styles of leadership and BD team members. Cons, tons of turnover, both firing and resignations, hiring friends who are unqualified for the roles they're hired into, disengaged staff. We all put a nice face up front, but a lot of us are sick and tired of how things are run and managed. Leadership who have no clue what they're doing and see through rose-tinted lens. Leaders who don't even know the roles and responsibilities of those reporting to them. Leaders who push that everything in the organization is amazing and working well when it is a blazing dumpster fire. Unsure about the future, no pay or career growth transparency, limited career growth for non-BD roles. For an organization called Invest Alberta, you sure are hiring so many new team members in Calgary that people are forced to go home as there isn't enough space in the office for when you get everyone for in-person meetings. Advice to leadership. Know the business better, build relationships rather than treating everything as a number, understand how your teams really feel. And we saved the best for last. This is an anonymous current employee who's worked there for several years. Pros, the intended impact of the work is what keeps many still engaged, but not worth the toxic environment. While compensation is good, they are still bleeding good talent. The cons. The CEO is a narcissist who enjoys bullying staff, putting down people, and taking credit for their work. He weaponizes people in the organization to turn them against each other or get them to do his bidding for him. He has surrounded himself with spineless people that will do what he asks. The only opportunity to grow or have any impact is to follow the CEO blindly. A ton of turnover, over 30%. Talented and knowledgeable people either leaving, pushed out, or being fired for not agreeing with leadership. It goes on. The organizational values are a joke. Not one leader at the top acts in ways that align with the values. Benefit plan was downgraded significantly. Disengaged board. They don't care about the mess the executives are making. Everyone in the ecosystem knows that the organization is a huge mess and no one trusts Invest Alberta. Bottom line is that the organization is sinking because the executive is acting in unethical and immoral ways. Advice to leadership. Advice to the board. Fire the entire executive team, starting with the CEO and his friend, the CEO. Advice to staff, current and future run. So that's not super great reviews for Invest Alberta. But you know, at least Redford is also from BC, so maybe her and the CEO will get along. Moving on from there. At a press conference to announce a new 10-bed navigation center in Calgary for the homeless that will open just in time for Stampede. So they'll have places to take the homeless people 24 hours. Never mind the fact that there is already, as was pointed out by Chaz Smith by Be the Change YYC, there is already a navigation center that bundles all the services, a lot of the services together in one place. That's a total aside, though. Smith was actually asked about insurance. Anybody who pays insurance in the province of Alberta knows that insurance rates have been skyrocketing because the UCP lifted the caps on the insurance. And so the insurance company said, we like money. And everybody's insurance has gone up considerably. Smith was asked about it. And pretty clear what the future is.
Absolutely, unconditionally ruled out the government auto insurance or public auto insurance option for Alberta.
I can tell.
And if so, why? And if not, why? And
Well,
that's my first question.
I can tell you that the sticker shock of bringing through a fully publicly funded auto insurance program in Alberta made all the ministers' eyes pop. It's something like $3 billion that we would need to set it up and capitalize it. And in addition to that, I think we would lose somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 to 5,000 jobs in the private sector, which is not something we're inclined to do. We like the ability to have a free enterprise market with a lot of players, but we're still trying to navigate how we get to that. How do we deal with the issue of escalating cost of repairs? How do we deal with the escalating cost of litigation? How do we make sure that when there are profits, they get shared back to the policy payers? So we've done some new guidelines around that. There's more that we need to do, but we just launched a major consultation 2 weeks ago to try to get that feedback. But I would say that the appetite for a full Alberta-run public insurance system is very low. I wouldn't anticipate that would very likely be the result that would emerge from this consultation.
So you see, it's because of the costs that you can't go ahead. It would just cost so much money. It's not like Danny has a history of pursuing projects that are going to cost billions to no discernible benefit. I mean, we could talk about the Alberta Pension Plan. There's a report that estimates that the price of setting up the Alberta Pension Plan to be $101 billion, depending on how much the province piggybacks on CPP mechanisms. So depending on how much the province is able to convince the Canada Pension Plan folks to continue running it, even though we're going to take all that money and run, that the setup cost would be anywhere between $100 and $1 billion. There's no budget set for the new provincial police force that Danny's in the process of building out of the sheriffs. Nobody knows how much it's going to cost, but we do know that ditching the RCMP would cost at least $360 million just for the setup. And the more that the RCMP are moved out of jurisdictions, the less the federal government is going to pay for the policing in those areas, which could amount up to a loss of $200 million a year. So it almost seems like the answer of, and that's to say nothing, sorry, before I get too fired up there, but that's to say nothing of all of the admin staff, all of the support staff, all of the other people that, when replaced by the sheriffs, may or may not keep their jobs. If we go with a pension plan, there's going to be jobs lost. If we go with the police force, there's going to be jobs lost. There will be other jobs created, but there's going to be jobs lost. So it almost seems like Danny's okay with spending hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on pursuing a pension plan, on a police force. But when it comes to something that would measurably impact the affordability crisis that everyday Albertans are facing, whoa, it's going to cost some money. We don't know if we want to spend that money, because if we spend the money on actually impacting the bottom line of Albertans, we might not have the money to blow on a pension plan and a police force that we can pursue for no reasons other than ideological ones. Moving on from there. I just want to be clear, before we wrap things up tonight, we do have some happy. We have a couple of lighter stories that we're going to play with a little bit, but we got to plow through the last few minutes here. So it's Pride Month. June is Pride Month. Happy Pride, everybody. For a province that wasn't satisfied being the first province to roll back protections for LGBTQ youth when they changed the rules on GSAs. Now we're going after the trans kids as a province. So happy Pride. And we're celebrating in many parts of rural Alberta Pride in the way that we traditionally do. Okotoks saw its crosswalks vandalized. Somebody painted blue paint over the rainbow crosswalk, which is unacceptable. On the good news side, the town of Barrhead at the end of May the city council unanimously voted to approve a pride crosswalk. So that's fantastic news. But of course, it didn't take long for the Barrhead neutrality group to materialize with their rules about a neutrality bylaw. They believe the crosswalk should only be painted in the standard white stripe pattern between two parallel lines. Only national, provincial, and municipal flags should be flown. There should be no decorations on town crosswalks or displaying of flags supporting political, social, or religious movements or commercial entities. No grandfathering of any existing crosswalks or flags that contravene the new bylaw should be authorized. So there's always a group. But two things can be true and relevant at the same time. Because not only is June Pride Month, it's also Men's Mental Health Month. And I don't think I'm stepping out of line. I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say there's probably a really good correlation between all of the bullshit that is toxic masculinity and all of the hate and the fear that gets directed towards the LGBTQ2S plus community. There's probably a healthy correlation to be made there. There's probably a healthy correlation between all of the insecurity that a lot of men experience and the need to attack the LGBTQ2S plus community. Two things can be true at the same time. I am, and this is true, a middle-aged white guy with a boatload of privilege. I have also had throughout my life not insignificant struggles with mental health. I've tried to be, when I can be, as public as I can be about those. Anybody who's been following the show for any length of time knows that I also work professionally as a paramedic. And anybody who follows the show for any length of time also knows that I had a diagnosis of PTSD about 2-3 years ago. And I was off work for a year. For the first part of that year, I could barely leave the house. The idea of being in crowds was impossible. I was very fortunate in that because of the work that I do and because I've worked with peer support organizations within EMS for years, I was able to recognize what was going on with me, and I was able to reach out and ask for help. And I was able to do that knowing that it didn't make me less of a person for recognizing that I was struggling with something and that I had a problem and I needed help. I don't view that decision as being a sign of weakness. And nobody should. If somebody's struggling and they choose to ask for help, that should be something that is supported and celebrated. Because all too often people don't know that they have a problem, or they're too afraid to recognize that they have a problem and say something. I also have it on reasonably good authority that there are, in fact, men who are members of the LGBTQ2S plus community. And so it can absolutely be both Pride Month and Men's Mental Health Month and a variety of other months. I'm sure I'm missing a couple. I just chose these two because I could tie them together nicely with a little bow. Just because something is being celebrated or acknowledged or conversations are being initiated around a topic doesn't mean that anything else is less. And we need to stop looking at it that way. Because it's not okay for people to be painting over pride crosswalks. It's not okay for people to be doing burnouts on pride crosswalks. And if we had, I like to think, more open conversations about men's mental health, about the influence of toxic masculinity, which is absolutely a thing. If we had more conversations about those things, and if we provided spaces for men to talk about their failings, for them to talk about their insecurities, and for them to talk about the things that they're afraid to talk about because they feel like they're going to be judged. If we're able to provide more spaces, maybe we would see less of all of the bigotry, of all of the externalized internal feelings. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know for sure, but I do know that as we see a suicide rate among men that is horrifying, and as we see countless mental health issues go undiagnosed, and men living with insecurity and loneliness, we have to start talking about it because it affects everybody. I promised we were going to have some fun. Though, in the spirit of pride, before we move on to our very last story, I just want to talk about David Staples for a second, because this guy, I don't even know how he, like I said, we get DMs from folks. We get the little tips from time to time, and we do our very best to try to like confirm them. We do our very best to go, oh wow, we got that wrong. We're going to delete it, and then we're going to say, hey, we kind of shit the bed on that one. Sorry, everybody, because that's called, I don't know, being an adult or something. David Staples struggles with that, I think, a little bit, maybe. Just speculation, because it was just yesterday that David Staples tweeted out, huge news, AB Danielle Smith, and he tagged her. And Alberta was ahead of the curve on the trans issue. When will @Nenshi and @Justin Trudeau follow the science and the experts and stop supporting the disaster of massive medical transition of children? Now, first of all, it's not that massive. We're talking about a small number of kids, okay? And we're talking about a small number of teenagers. And when, as we said before on the show, when we're talking about puberty blockers or hormone replacement therapy, that's really the only interventions that are done prior to being 18. You can't get bottom surgery anywhere in Canada prior to being 18, and top surgery is super rare. So it's not that big of a deal. We don't need to blow it out of proportion, I don't think. It's also all medically supervised by physicians. So, trust the experts, go about your day. But he cites the American College of Pediatricians. And they say a group of pediatricians, medical organizations, and policy organizations have signed a declaration urging a stop to the promotion of harmful interventions on children with youth or with gender dysphoria. Comment and repost if you agree. Oh, we're not data mining at all, are we? Then sign the declaration at doctorsprotectingchildren.org. Again, so much to unpack here, but it'll be fun, I promise. So, first of all, I love the fact that they're saying, hey, you know what? We've got this highly credentialed group that has signed this petition. And hey, Twitter user Bob36412, you can too. So, right out of the gates, I have some questions about the credentials on this signature. But if we actually take a look at who the American College of Pediatricians are, well, gosh, we don't have to look any farther than Wikipedia. The American College of Pediatricians. This article is about the socially conservative advocacy group for the Professional Association of Pediatricians. See, the American Academy of Pediatrics. So it's not what it says it wants you to be. The American College of Pediatricians is a socially conservative advocacy group of pediatricians and other healthcare professionals in the United States, founded in 2002. The group advocates against abortion rights and rights for gay, queer, and transgender people. They sound lovely. ACPEDS, their acronym, not mine, promotes conversion therapy and purity culture. As of 2022, its membership has been reported at about 700 physicians out of the hundreds of thousands across the United States. It took us all of 30 seconds to go, wait, what? Who are these people? And find this Wikipedia entry. David Staples, the journalist. Didn't get there. So that's kind of fun. Last thing that we want to talk about, because I have a bias on this one, I'm not going to lie, but it is relevant to provincial politics. Word broke this week that the federal Conservatives had declined two candidates who are running for the nomination in Calgary Signal Hill. The current MP there has said that he's not going to run in the next election, but he's not stepping down neither. And so there was a bunch of people that wanted to get nominated for the race. They wanted to do the thing. And I know there is a very strong argument to be made for, well, the leopards eating faces party ate people's faces. Who could have ever seen that coming? But I have some questions. Because here's the thing. We've had Leela here on the show twice. I've certainly had conversations with her outside of the show. And like I said, I am definitely quite biased. She has a incredibly optimistic approach to things. She's one of those people who legitimately believes that she can change things from within. So there's that. I personally think that there's much better venues for her to change things from within or from without. But there are some very real questions to be asked about why the two candidates that were declined. I'm only going to talk about Leela because I try to keep the other one's name out of my mouth. But there were no reasons given for the declination. The two speculative reasons that people have posted on are, one, her views were incompatible with the party, and two, well, she didn't live there. And it's worth spending a little bit of time maybe unpacking the views incompatible with the party piece, because while Leela is many things, I have never seen her engage in any form of hate speech or arguing for the removal of women's rights or the women's ability to access health care. And yet, we got to talk about this guy for a sec, because this is the MP for, he's an MP from Alberta, and his name is Arnold Viersen. And Arnold has some fascinating views. In an interview with Liberal MP Nathan Erskine Smith, who hosts a podcast called Uncommons, so it's two MPs getting together. Alberta Conservative MP Arnold Viersen also stressed his social conservative credentials on other issues, saying he wants protections for what he calls the preborn, supports Alberta Danielle Smith's transgender policies, and would vote to criminalize cannabis possession again if given the opportunity. Asked by Erskine Smith about a hypothetical future bill to overturn same-sex marriage, Viersen said that he would vote gay marriage down. Now, this obviously touched off a bit of a firestorm, and Pierre Poilievre did his very best to address it. He disagrees with the Conservative MP. He says same-sex marriage is legal and will remain legal when I am Prime Minister, full stop. He also says that Viersen's views are not the views that he shares, or are they the views of the party? Viersen will be running in the next election. So it seems pretty clear you've got to have some pretty repugnant, some pretty horrifying views in order to be rejected by the Conservative Party. Well, a lot of people will have said, well, yeah, but it's the residency thing. You know, you have to be able to live in the constituency unless you like literally campaign against doing that. Because in 2019, Conservative MP, who's still Conservative MP Tim Appal, said that he was not going to move back to Alberta if elected. After he won his first seat, he moved his family out to Ontario. Shorter commute, I guess. He travels back every once in a while to Ottawa to touch grass, I guess. But he doesn't live in Alberta. His primary residence is in Ontario. And so the residency piece, like if it's not even a question of do you live in the same city, it's a question of do you live in the same province as the people that you're representing. You're allowed to run. It's going to be allowed to run. Can't be that. So it seems like if you're too far on the far right, you're allowed to run. If you don't live in the same province, you're allowed to run. So it really does beg the question, what was it about Leela here that was so bad that the Conservative Party of Canada said, "Oh no, we're gonna decline your nomination. We're not going to let the people of Signal Hill decide if they want you to be among the candidates to run. We're just going to say, nope, so long, thanks for all the fish." And that is the end of our program proper for the evening. I got one little thing I got to plug, and then I can see we've got one person in the queue on the Twitter Spaces. We're going to try to keep the open mic. It was a very long program tonight. I apologize for that. We're going to try to keep the open mic short because I'm tired. And it's about me. But we will be having a shorter program next week because we are back with a vengeance with our live shows. We've got some exciting programs that we're looking forward to bringing you. We're going to be doing a deep dive on all of the bills that the UCP passed in this last legislative session and what they can potentially mean from Alberta. We're going to turn to a couple of experts, hopefully, on that. We're going to be having some conversations about the prayers that are happening in schools and in elected places, and questions as to the constitutionality of them. So we've got a lot of stuff that we're going to be bringing in over the next couple of weeks and months. And this is where we're gonna do the plug, because we do, as always, rely on our Patreon sponsors for the support to make the show happen, and we would love our Patreon sponsors so very, very much. If you want to be one of our Patreon sponsors, you can sign up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. But we've heard some people say, I don't want to do the monthly thing. I don't want to be that. I want to just, I want to give you a little bit of money so that I can say that I helped. And that's that. Two pieces of news on that front. First piece of news, the Breakdown is officially a thing. We're an entity now. We did the registry thing, and so we're for real ZZs all the way. Mostly because I had to do my taxes, but yeah, we are a official entity now as the Breakdown Media. And as such, we're going to try to start to do a little bit more in the spaces that we play in. One of the things that we really would have liked to have done with the protest that happened in Calgary a couple weeks ago was we would have liked to been able to do a little bit more conversations. We would have liked to do a little bit of a on-the-spot filming thing that we could bring into an episode, but we need some toys to be able to do that. One of the things, we have a piece of equipment in particular that we're looking at that kind of does the whole package in a compact thing. If you would like to help us achieve our goal of buying this new camera package that will allow us to do the things and the stuffs, we're now taking e-transfers. You can send an e-transfer to info@thebreakdownab.ca. Pretty sure I got that right. It'll be in the show notes. So yeah, if you want to help us get that piece of equipment so we can get out and do some filming for the summer, we've got a couple ideas on that. info@thebreakdownab.ca. So thanks for that. All of that being said, let's see if we can bring in a couple of folks to share some thoughts. I'm going to bring in somebody who's been waiting for quite some time now. We got Chris. Chris, what's going on tonight, my friend?
Have to learn how to turn a mic on. Hey, Nate, how's it going?
I have the same problem just about every single show at the beginning, so I feel you, man. I'm doing good. How are you?
I can't complain. It's going well. I mean, as far as things go, I know it's you want to kind of keep it short, so I have a couple notes, but I'm going to keep them like bullet point quick.
Please do.
My first one was, and sorry, they're obviously related to Alberta politics, but they're not necessarily related to what we talked about tonight. The first one is Joseph Scow. He had a press conference about the end of the spring session back in, I think it was last week or week before. And I just thought I want to mention it because it was really, really, really interesting to see. He was asked by journalist Sean Amato, who now I believe works for City TV. He was asked about David Parker, and just it was interesting because he's actually the first non-Danielle Smith Alberta related person I've seen who's been asked about this.
Okay.
Like he started in the UCP, and I don't know, it seemed like his face just went white. He was like, "We don't talk about David Parker. We don't talk about what Danielle Smith says to David Parker." But it was really interesting just seeing kind of that reaction of like this like person being like introduced not just to the premier but to members of her cabinet.
I want to do that song now.
Which one?
There's that Disney. We don't talk about.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to do that.
That relates to another point I have. I'm going to say that for the end because it's a lighter note.
Okay, perfect. Keep going.
My second point I was going to mention is there's a Ledger poll that came out that Parker actually, sorry not to bring him up again, but he had tweeted on his account saying, like he had retweeted someone saying, this Ledger account's bad at math, it doesn't work, but it's actually the Edmonton Journal just covered it back on June 6th. Apparently, the UCP, they're slowly decreasing in support. They've dropped like 4 points while the NDP are maintaining. And I thought that was kind of interesting because that's the first time we've seen since post-election. So we're looking at over a year later, we're finally seeing a slip in the polls that's more than just kind of like steady. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting to notice. It's like because it's kind of like you wonder if the news is going to hit anything. My third point I was going to say, and sorry, I'm almost done. The fall session begins a week before the UCP AGM.
Sure does.
And so I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with how they're going to release their platform, because I feel like they kind of have like two options they can go with. They can go, I mean, again, they could mix this, but whatever. I'm thinking they could either go with the affordability route. I know they've obviously mentioned they're planning on doing like the gender nonsense. Their anti-trans bill. So obviously there's going to be some ideology here, but I wonder if they're going to lean towards affordability to try and maintain their general base, or if they're going to go with ideology to try and maintain whatever base they have right before the AGM. Because, I mean, especially for Danielle Smith, this is kind of like I don't want to say do or die for negative context, but you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like sink or swim for at this point.
Oh, for sure. I think we're going to see a lot more of the ideology, and that's certainly the rumors that are in the ether. I think that what we're about to see from Danielle Smith is a Danielle Smith who's going to go on a charm offensive for the rest of the summer. She's already said she's going to be touring the entire province. So I think she's going to be trying to ingratiate herself with rural Alberta as much as she possibly can. I'm sure she's just going to have the bestest stampede ever. But I think it's also going to be a very interesting time because I think with David Parker, I mean, I never want to be the guy to underestimate David Parker, but I think that his influence is definitely on the waning side of things. I think that more and more people are starting to look at David Parker as being a bit of a bad punchline because he overreached so much. He stopped being the organizer and pictured himself as the great leader or the Messiah or whatever that fantasy that he talked about that one time was. And so I think that his star is very much setting. But I think that what we're going to see is a lot more of the influence of a certain Rob Anderson. And I think it's important to remember that when it comes to a lot of Smith's big policy strokes, those are Rob Anderson. Those are Free Alberta Strategy initiatives. So I think that it's going to be a fascinating transition to see the fear of David Parker to the Rob's so smart, I'll do what he tells me, than anything.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like kind of like changing in advisor, so to speak. Like obviously not advisor, because I don't think that Parker ever truly had a advisory role. I think it was always more like the tension between like whereas Rob Anderson, like you said, he's more of I don't want to say mastermind, but definitely has that perspective of like he comes from the ideological well that Daniel Smith is drawing up now.
Yeah.
So the question is whether whether the base is on board with the Rob Anderson viewpoint, and I wonder if they're not extreme enough.
Well, I think, and it's been brought up here in the chat, that there is a section of the righty right, the Marco van Hogenbos, that is very dissatisfied with the UCP, and they don't think that the UCP has gone far enough. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing this 1905 committee roll out, because life was better before insulin, I guess. So I think that it's going to be fascinating to see what components support Smith, because there's rumors that the old guard of the PC are saying enough is enough, and they're going to come in with an anti-Smith vote. And then there's rumors that the righty right are going to want to send Danny a message. And so I certainly don't think that we're going to see like a 95% approval coming out of the AGM. But as somebody who won the leadership with like 51% or 53%, I think that if Smith gets 50% plus one vote, she's going to say, "Ha ha, I win, and I'm going to listen better. That's what I did all summer." So that's my
Right. It's like anything less than a total defeat is a victory for her.
Yeah.
Just to switch to my last like happy point of the thing, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do you remember the Jason Steffen rant question that he did during spring session? Where I'm not gonna try to re-say the whole thing because it's kind of like a car crash in my mouth. I just don't want to do it. But the whole "who's the boss" thing.
Yeah, I do.
I really, and I'm gonna put this in the ether. If someone is willing to do this, I would love you forever. I want someone to do like a "Who's the Boss" like like the TV show credits, but with like Jason Statham just saying it every time or something. I don't know. I just got that vibe of like Tony Danza. He is him. Just he put him in. He can do it. He's the boss, not his wife.
I love it.
But hey, thanks for having me on, and I hope you have a great night.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm going to bring in Tammy next, and see what Tammy's got to throw into the mix. Tammy, how's it going?
Hi, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. It's been a while.
It was the amount of work that again, like it's not just an excuse. The amount of work that putting together that Western Standard episode was nuts.
I know.
And it's still not done because we have to wait. We found out. I don't even know if I've said this yet, but we found out that like 2 days, of course it was 2 days. 2 days after we aired it, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner has actually started doing. They've opened a file and they're doing an investigation to see if we can actually get the totals. So it's still not done.
Cool. And of course, my so I've had a month. So first off, I wanted to be in Edmonton for the first. I wanted to be there for the second one too, but when everybody got together and we're all protesting together. So first, my van, my brand new. Well, it's not brand new. It's a new used vehicle, new to me, but it's still used. It died. Luckily, and the what do you call it? The warranty that they sold it with didn't cover what died.
Oh no.
So I've had to. Luckily, I've found two very good mechanics. The first one didn't have the right computer to hook up to the computer of the van. But the second one, the guy he referred us to, did, and when I gimped out to meet him on my gimp stick, because he looked at the van and he saw the disability placard, and he looked at my daughter who'd come out, and he said, "Is it you or is it your mom that's disabled?" And she said, "It's my mom." So I felt like, okay, not that he was calling us out, but there's always that curiosity, because I think he was trying to figure out, he wanted to do something nice for someone, but he wanted to make sure he wasn't just doing it with someone that wasn't disabled, right? That just had the placard for. So I felt like, you know what? He's being really nice. I'm going to gimp out and meet him. So he sees me wander up, and I'm slow. I'm slow as crap. And I gimp up to the vehicle, and there's construction in our area. So, of course, the van is a fair ways from the house. And so he sees me wander up. He's like, "Hi, Mom. Thanks for coming and meeting me." Like, it wasn't even a question, but a repair that I know conservatively costs between $1,000 and $1,200. He's doing it for $600.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So, yeah. So trust me, he's now my favorite person ever. But as well, I was going to take the bus, and my mobility scooter died.
Oh, no.
So I've been totally stuck in the house. He's got the van fixed mostly now. Like, he's got the part in and it runs, but he's got to take the van at his place, because they call it the WIN module, and it's basically the electronic key that starts the van that died. And so to figure out that it was after he did a whole bunch of testing, he went and got a new WIN module, but it takes, because it's in a van, he's got to basically take apart the entire dash of the van to get it actually in place. So he actually brought the wires down and just hooked it up to the WIN module to make sure that was what was wrong. So he put in the new WIN module, so it runs, but he's got to take it back to his place and totally take apart the dash and everything, and take out the bad one that's still in there, and actually set the new one into the dash properly. So
I'm glad you're getting some progress and a good deal.
Yeah, so the next time that there's a big protest in Edmonton, I'll be there.
Excellent.
But this time it just didn't work out. So the thing I actually wanted to talk about, though, is the Pharmacist thing.
Okay.
So I know you've heard all of my health issues. I'm diabetic. I have a really awesome pharmacist. But I have a real issue with these pharmacists and with the Alberta government letting pharmacists come in and basically try to be pseudo doctors. My pharmacist won't do much more because of all the things I have wrong with me than if I'm kind of in between a point when I've run out of meds and I've got like an appointment for my doctor that's like they just couldn't get me in because I don't actually have a real doctor. I'm seeing somebody else in the practice. So I'm like 2 weeks away of going to see the doctor. He'll basically give me enough meds to cover the 2 weeks until I can get in and see the doctor. But just earlier this year, I had when I went to one of the doctors at the practice that my old doctor used to be at, they looked at my eye. They thought it was just a regular old eye infection. So I went in, they prescribed me something. I took it home, used it faithfully. The infection didn't go away. So I went back. They prescribed me something else, still claiming it was an eye infection. Now, I write for a living. I'm a technical writer. So at the end of that new prescription, my eye still wasn't healing. That infection wasn't going away. It didn't start going away until I went to one of the ophthalmologists at the eye clinic here at the Royal Alec. And he was like one of the top guys. I am now seeing the top guy who has basically smacked my hands and said, he'll do nasty things to me if I go to a family doctor. Still an MD. A family doctor to have my eye looked at ever again. He says family doctors shouldn't be treating eye issues for anyone because they simply don't have the equipment or the training to recognize when something is really going wrong. That eye issue I had could have left me blind.
Yeah. Well, this is why it's so important to recognize the value and the fact that we need specialists for things, and to try to make any one profession everything to everyone is just not going to work.
Nope, absolutely not. And I mean, thank goodness because basically I couldn't get in to see someone at my regular doctor again. So I had gone, I was in tears at the time, and I went to the Devon emergency because that's where we used to take my mom. So we had kind of a relationship with the doctors at that Devon emergency. And he looked at me and he said, I can't do anything to help you. I'm going to refer you. But he recognized that it needed to be referred. And he referred me to the eye clinic at the Royal. And they took care of things. Perfect. And I'm now seeing the top ophthalmologist in Alberta for my eye issues.
Well, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to throw into the mix there?
One more thing. Okay. This is a me thing. So I am sick to death, and I'm certain everyone else on the show is as well, of all the trolls and the bots in Twitter. And this is just a personal thing, but if people notice someone that you're convinced is a troll or a bot,
I love what you do.
I am in about a week's time getting an app that I will be able to actually basically feed their Twitter feed into this app, and it will bring me back. It won't tell me if that person is a bot, but generally birds of a feather flock together.
Yeah.
So it will tell me on a percentage how many people that follow that person are fake and how many are real. So when I start doing this, I'm going to start a hashtag for all of these folks. I'll let you know so you guys can share it if you want, but you'll be able to see all the screenshots of these people that I detect. And I'm going to be fair. If you're just a jerk and you don't come up as a high percentage of bots, I'll say, okay, this guy's real. He's a jerk, but he's real. But I suspect a lot of the people who are jerks are actually bots and trolls. And I'm going to start basically posting these on my regular Twitter feed because I normally do. I'm certain other people have seen bot, troll.
Yep. Oh, no, I appreciate what you do.
So if there are people that you want me to check out with this new cool app that I'm going to be using, please do. Just send me a DM. Say, hey, Tammy, can you check this guy out? And I'll check him out for you and I'll post it on the feed.
Awesome.
So that was my thing.
Thank you.
You have a good night.
You have a good night as well. I'm just, as you were talking there, Tammy, I just got to quickly do a little update because there's been this sort of seismic thing that's happened a little bit in Alberta politics. Of course, right before we started the show, Shannon Phillips has resigned from the Globe and Mail. The Shannon Phillips resigned. Story came by Rishi Nagar at 7:22. So there's a by-election coming in Lethbridge. So that'll be spicy. I wanted to make sure that I threw that into the mix because otherwise it would be a whole week. But yeah, thank you so much, Lynn. I'm going to bring in our last couple of speakers for hopefully quick because I got to shut it down soon. But I'm going to bring in Cassandra and we'll go. Hey, Cassandra, what's up?
Hello.
How's it going?
How's it going?
I'm good.
Awesome. Me too. Well, I was going to actually talk about the pharmacy thing, but the first caller just brought something to my mind, so I'm just going to quickly mention. I know I'm redundant about the Blue Book and Preston Manning, but there was a picture that was just posted by Daniel Smith's team or whatever, and it was a recent picture of her between Stephen Harper and Preston Manning.
Yep.
And I would just like to maintain, we can speculate about the Parkers and Rob Anderson and all of that, but ultimately those two, they're the ones, they're the real puppet masters. I'd bet dollars to donuts on that. And that's all I want to say about that. But the pharmacy thing, I'm looking for a new pharmacy. I've been with the same shoppers for 10 years. I had wonderful staff. That was why I stayed there. And all of a sudden recently, all these wonderful staff that were super knowledgeable about medications, super knowledgeable about different types of ways to submit the insurance. And like I have an InnovaCare card, which actually pays the difference between the generic and the name brand if I need a name brand. And all these staff that were there forever that I knew and that were, as I said, very knowledgeable are all gone. And they've replaced them with a lot of new pharmacy staff and pharmacists that I have never, the level of incompetence just in doing their jobs as pharmacists and like being knowledgeable about medication and how to submit through insurance and all of this, the amount of mistakes, the amount of fights I've had over things to do with my medication and how they're prescribed. And it's just, the level of incompetence is just mind blowing with the new staff that they put in there. And now I'm a part of the low laws boycott too, but I was looking before because of this, and it just scares me. It frightens me that these are the people that they want to allow to diagnose and subscribe for some of these things that you mentioned. It just terrifies me, because they can't even do their regular job, let alone do you know what I mean? Like
I do,
like,
and I mean,
this is shoppers specifically, right? Like,
I'm a big believer that in any profession, that there is always going to be a spectrum of quality of the thing. So you can talk about sales, and you can have salespeople that are going to absolutely crush it 99% of the time, and then you're going to have that 1% at the bottom that are just absolute bottom feeders who will take advantage of everybody. Same thing applies in any profession. And so when I take a look at sort of the high risk sort of professions, and healthcare obviously would be one of them. I would also make the argument law enforcement too. But when you take a look at those, that's where the guardrails need to be that much more robust and that much more clearly defined, so that those abuses or those mistakes happen with the minimal amount of frequency.
Well, and I absolutely agree with you, Nate. And I'll tell you, like, there is something going on with Shopper. Like, we know about this new thing that our government wants to do with shoppers. But the thing is it's not just my pharmacy. I know other people that go to different, and they're having the same experience. For some reason, a lot of the really highly skilled and very knowledgeable and high quality staff they have are no longer there in multiple Shoppers pharmacies. And the people they're hiring, I don't know, maybe they're paying them less money. I don't know what the reason is, but this is all happening around the time that our government wants them to also start being able to prescribe all these other things and diagnose things they shouldn't be diagnosing. And I just wanted to, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I want to be clear, for the
Yeah.
record, not dunking on pharmacists. That's not the goal
No,
here at
no,
all.
not at all.
I mean,
like I said, they had highly skilled pharmacists and they're wonderful people. And I just don't know what's going on. Yeah.
But I would also make the argument that even highly skilled pharmacists who are really, really good at being pharmacists are not. I mean, we got a comment in the spaces.
I agree. Yeah.
And I think it's really important to say that when you're saying, hey, pharmacists aren't supposed to be doing XYZ, it's because they're not supposed to be doing XYZ. That's not what they're trained for. That's not what their experience is.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree 100%. They shouldn't be doing it, period. But it's also frightening that, the specific company that we're talking about that is taking on this contract, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is also doing something weird with, they had some really good people and now they're doing funny things with them. So I don't know. I don't know, like maybe it's just my circle of people, but I would be interested to know how many other people have had that experience, because I think it's, like as you said, pharmacists shouldn't be doing it in the first place, but it's even more frightening when you think that they might be trying to cut costs by maybe hiring less experienced people, let's say.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I mean, I'll put it this way, and then I'll move on to our last caller real quick before I shut it down for the night. I just finished talking like half hour, 45 minutes ago about how I work professionally as a paramedic, and one of the things that I think is incumbent on any healthcare practitioner is to know when you're out. You've hit the limits of your sandbox, and so I'm really, really good, I like to think, at the first 20 to 30 minutes of just about anything. But the number of times that I will go to somebody's house and I will, they'll say, oh, these are my symptoms. And I'll go, yeah, let's go get you some tests. And it's not that I'm a bad paramedic or I'm not Dr.
No,
House or
you're
anything.
doing what you're supposed to do. You're
Exactly.
checking. That's what exactly you're there to be, the first responder that looks at somebody and says, okay, what's going on? Administer if they need something immediately, have the skills to administer, but also know when you need to defer to the doctors and get somebody in right away. And I absolutely agree, Nate. Like, yeah, 100%.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Cassandra. And I'm going to make sure that next week's, one of the things that I've missed over the last month is this open forum and this open mic that we have here on the show. And I'm going to make sure next week that we only do like an hour of pre-formatted content so that we can have more time for these conversations. I got one other person that I want to try to get in real quick before I shut it down. This is Parking Space. So this could be interesting. I wonder if we're going to have another Spider-Man episode here. Parking Space, what's going on tonight?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. I'd like to see test so. Hello.
Yeah, no, I can hear you.
Hi. How do I sound?
Fine.
All right. It doesn't matter. How's it going, Nate?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Oh boy, I think we've talked a little bit. No, can you tell the audience who I am just a little bit? If it is unworried, all I gotta say is that I have some really fun meetings and cool shit planned, and it just feels so good. This just feels so good. I don't want to spoil too much, but I've been doing some digging, and I know you know, and soon my efforts are going to be laid out, and it's going to be so awesome. And
Okay.
I just want to say, this is less of more of a talk, but more of a, I gotta say, it's just really nice seeing people just speak up against all the bullshit that's going on in this province. I know there's a lot of bad news, but I think positive change is possible here in this place. I don't think this place hasn't been fully lost. I know people like Parker and whoever the rock guy is are big and scary, but like there's more of us than there's more of them. And I think with time, I think we might be able to see positive change. That rally was really good. And I gotta say, I'm glad that we're starting to get loud. It's just really awesome, you know?
I agree with everything you said there. I missed like 3/4 of it because you were kind of cutting in and out. But no, I agree. I think positive change absolutely is possible. And I think that it is very good that more and more people are starting to get more comfortable using their voices.
Let's see, how can I say? I can't, if what I found on this person is true, it's a person we all know, a person that we're all annoyed with. I can't wait. It's going to be so funny seeing this current government trying to defend their parental rights policy if what I found out is true. It's going to be funny. That'll be great.
You're cutting in and out there, man. So I'm gonna cut you off there. But I love the message of positivity there. So
yeah, just keep going. I'm using. I don't know if the thing I'm using is cutting out. I'm just using a little voice filter, so I guess that's what's causing it.
Okay, cool. Well, you have a good night.
You too, friend.
All right, that was one of the more interesting conversations. It wasn't quite Spider-Man level, but that was unique. And that's it for tonight's episode. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who stuck around in the chat. It's good to see the chat robust and rolling again. I've been catching up on it as we've been going through the night. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who has been listening on the Twitter Spaces, or if you've been watching on one of our live streams. We are streaming tonight too. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. I think that's all of them. And of course, if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast after the fact, thank you very much for listening. And if you don't mind leaving us a rating, if you're watching on the YouTubes, smash that like and subscribe, as the kids say, because that helps us get into better and more ears and eyes and does stuff with the algorithm. I don't know. It's all very complicated. But yeah, that's it. I'm going to plug it one more time. If you're somebody who wants to support the show, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're producing here, you can help support us at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. And if you're somebody who does not want to do the Patreoning, then you can send e-transfers to info@thebreakdownab.ca, because we really want to get that new fancy camera. So there's my story about that. We will be back next Sunday. We don't have any big major projects cooking for the next little bit. So we're going to be doing the regular weekly live shows, and we're going to have some really fantastic interviews that we're going to be presenting over the coming weeks leading up to summer as well. So all of that being said, thank you guys so much for sticking around, especially given the little absence that we had there. It's going to be a fascinating summer from political standpoints, especially with the breaking news that Shannon Phillips has resigned. So stay frosty. And I meant what I said earlier about Men's Mental Health Month and Pride. The two things are not mutually exclusive. And I can't help but think if fixing one will probably help fix the other. So have the conversations. Talk to people. Because it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to ask for help. Have those conversations. And as always, keep the conversations going.
Bye.